So apparently I've got tennis elbow, which is bizarre really, because I don't play tennis and the heaviest things I've been lifting have been books. Okay, I'm starting to see the problem here. Hello, welcome to The Book Thing. My name is Mark, and this is the second half of the list of 50 books that I want to read before I'm 50. And I just want to say a big thank you as well to all of you for watching the first half of this list. It has had a fantastic response. That wasn't a complete gag, by the way. I do have tennis elbow at the moment, and it hurts an awful lot. But it wasn't something I got from lifting up books. It was something I got in the same way that Spinal Tap lost one of their drummers through a bizarre gardening accident. I've been to the physiotherapist, and he's given me plenty of exercises to do. He's told me not to put too much weight on it and to drink plenty of whiskey to soothe the pain. He didn't actually say the whiskey part, it was just something I inferred from the way he was talking. You'd assume that with a video about the 50 books I want to read before I'm 50, I'd have this well and truly planned out in advance. You'd assume wrong. I'm kind of glad I split the list up into two parts, because in the week between when I filmed the first half and now, I've chopped and changed the second half of the list quite a bit. When I was putting this list together, the obvious ones like War and Peace and The Count of Monte Cristo, they were the definite ones that I wanted from the start. But in my long list, there was a whole load of other ones which were maybes that were swapped in and out. And they mostly came from the second half of this list, which is the half that has less to do with classics. And one of the things that came up after doing the first half, and a couple of people pointed out, and it was something that I'd spotted myself when I was doing the edit, was that of the 25 books that I'd listed, 0 were written by women, which is kind of shit, I'm not going to lie. I did have some reasons for that. First up, I've been planning to do this video for the best part of a year, ever since I saw the video that Bonnie Nicole did that inspired me to do it. And I started to compile my long list about a year ago. And there was women on that long list that I have since read. Authors like Shirley Jackson and Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison and Jane Austen. Didn't work out quite so well with Jane Austen. But by reading them, I kind of then disqualified them from being able to put them on this list. There were other women authors in that classics list that I probably would have liked to include, the likes of Anne Bronte, Elizabeth Gaskell, Edith Wharton, that sort of thing. But I didn't, because I made the rule for myself that I wasn't going to go out and buy books for the list. I was going to focus on the books that I already had, and I didn't actually have any books by those authors. And a lot of the last list was also made up of the 10 hardest books video that I did. And the nominations for 10 hardest books, women apparently aren't as obtuse as men are, so they didn't get as many nominations as the male authors, so blame James Joyce. But even so, not including any women authors in that list is pretty crap. And yes, some people might say, what does it matter if the books are good, whether they're written by men or women? And to some people it doesn't matter. It kind of matters to me, purely because the whole point of this was to try and broaden my own reading horizons. And they're not particularly broad reading horizons, as everything is written by a dude. Now, the second half of the list did look better anyway, but for some of the borderline cases where I was of two minds as to whether to include them or not, some of those ones I've swapped out and put in some of the ones written by female authors, which was in two minds of. So anyway, I hope I haven't pissed too many people off with that revelation. On with the list. So I'm going to round out my list of modern literary fiction first, and the first one to do that with is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark, which is, thank goodness, a short book for a change. This is a story set in around about the 50s, I think, and it's set in a girls' school in Edinburgh who are taught by this charismatic teacher, Miss Jean Brodie. She inspires a lot of devotion and almost like a cult-like following from the girls in the class, even if the things that she's saying are a little bit fascisty. You're going to probably notice a little bit of a pattern of some of the books I'm going through today, and it gives you a bit of an insight into my thought process. But yeah, Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Fascinated to pick this one up. Next up, I've got The Bell by Iris Murdoch. I've read one Iris Murdoch book, which was The Sea, and it was one of my favorite books from last year, so I've been meaning to try some more Iris Murdoch since. This is the story of a little religious community in rural England and how the installation of a new bell in the church tower, I think, is the catalyst for a whole load of things starting to fall apart. So, you know, things falling apart. That's got to be fun. Next up, I have got The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. This one is probably going to be quite short on chuckles. This is the story of a young boy who was growing up in Afghanistan prior to the Russian invasion of the 70s, I think it was. He has a privileged life there and a friendship with the son of one of his parents' servants. Then the Russian invasion happens and he ends up having to escape. And then he has to go back many years later to try and find that childhood friend in an Afghanistan that is being run by the Taliban. This is just one of those books that has had rave reviews by pretty much everyone who has read it. So I'm really interested to give this one a go. Next up, I've got Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, and that's kicking in the Tellus elbow because this is a chunky one. This is the story of Thomas Cromwell, I believe a real life person, so this is some historical fiction, and this is about his life coming from sort of humble beginnings, and then he ends up being part of the court of King Henry VIII. There are two more books in the whole Thomas Cromwell series. There's, what are they called again? I think it's Bring Up the Bodies and Mirror and Light, I think are the other two in this. I've heard mixed reports of Wolf Hall. Many people have said that they really struggled to read it and didn't enjoy it very much, whereas other people have absolutely given it rave reviews. It won the Booker Prize, which, as I've said before, is not necessarily a mark of something that I'm going to enjoy. But I've been curious about Wolf Hall for many years, so let's see what this one looks like. Next up, I've got The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. Another piece of historical fiction, and this reimagines the time where the southern states still had slavery and people were escaping to the north in a network known as the Underground Railroad. That was very real. What Colson Whitehead has done in this is he has reimagined it as a literal underground railroad. So it's kind of historic science fiction, I think. I'm not really sure. This won Colson Whitehead the Pulitzer Prize, and it's an absolutely fascinating premise. And to round up my list of modern literary fiction, I've got Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, another winner of the Pulitzer Prize. This has been sitting on my shelves for a couple of years and I've been really meaning to get around to reading it. It's a retelling of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, except it's set in modern day Virginia, I think it is. So another fascinating premise. Really want to get onto this one, so it really had to go on this list of books I need to read before I'm 50. So next up is my non-fiction section, and it's a pretty short section, but there's a few books in here that I really want to get read before I'm 50. And the first of those is The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. So I don't think this needs much of an introduction, but this is the story of the young Jewish girl, Anne Frank, who was living in Amsterdam and in hiding during the Nazi occupation. So basically it's about this young girl growing up in hiding with her family. It's spoilers, it has a bit of an abrupt ending because unfortunately the family were found. I think they might have been informed on by someone, but they were found out, and all but Anne Frank's father were unfortunately killed in the Holocaust. Anne Frank's father went back after the war, found her diary and arranged for it to be published, and I think it was published around about 1947. Very powerful historical document, but also the thoughts on the inside of the head of just a young girl trying to grow up in a horrific situation. Next up, I've got The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe, and this is basically the story of the US space race. So in the wake of Yuri Gagarin being the first man to orbit the Earth and the fact that the Americans were behind the USSR in the space race. This is about the people who were involved, and specifically a lot of the early astronauts. So people who were test pilots who then became astronauts. So, you know, the likes of John Glenn and Chuck Yeager and Alan Shepard and all those. So really, really fascinating period of history. I've been meaning to read this one for years. Next up is another one from my list of top 10 hardest books, and it's The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And this one sparked an awful lot of debate in my last video, from people who are saying that this is actually fictionalized and other people saying that this is absolutely a work of non-fiction. I haven't read it, so I can't comment on it yet. It is drawn from Solzhenitsyn's personal experience spending time in the gulags, and from the conversations he had with others who were in those gulags at the time. And whatever it is a fascinating story, and it is a very, very important historical book, and for that reason it deserves its place on this list. And the final one of my non-fictions is Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. And this is about the political career of Abraham Lincoln, and from what I understand, a large portion of it is dedicated to getting rid of slavery, so the abolition of slavery. So after the American Civil War, a war that was largely fought on the principle of slavery, the southern states had been defeated, but Lincoln was still struggling to get through the abolition of slavery through Congress. And a large part about this is his political maneuverings and his ability to create alliances between people. So it's supposed to be an absolutely fascinating account of him as a president. So really, really interested in that one. So next up is a loose section of books that I'm calling Mysteries, Thrillers and Horrors. And I'm going to start this off with Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. This, of course, is the famous story of Rosemary and her husband who move into an apartment in New York. Rosemary becomes pregnant and starts to have suspicions about the intentions of her downstairs neighbours, and starts to have suspicions about her husband as well. Ira Levin also wrote The Stepford Wives as well. So he's very good about creating interesting nightmarish premises which have a lot of cultural commentary based on them as well. So I'm hoping that after reading Rosemary's Baby I might want to try some more of Ira Levin's stuff. Next up, I've got one of two collections of short stories, and the first one of those is The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. This is a selection of retold fairy tales. If you're familiar with the Neil Jordan film The Company of Wolves from the 80s, which is kind of a nightmarish werewolfy version of Little Red Riding Hood, I'm pretty sure the short story that's based on is in here. But even if it's not, there are still plenty of twisted versions of familiar fairy tales for me to get my teeth into. Next up, I've got Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, which might well be the book that I read next, and by the time this video goes up I might have actually read it, because I think it's going to do quite nicely for Halloween, which is in the next couple of days. So this is another one of Ray Bradbury's sort of coming of age childhood stories, and this is about a creepy carnival that rolls into town. And I don't really know much more than that, and I kind of don't want to know anymore. I prefer to go into this blind. A lot of people think that this is Ray Bradbury's best work, so I really want to give this a go. Next up, I've got Agatha Christie and Then There Were None. For God's sake, don't Google the original title of this book, or even the changed title of this book. It was written in a different time. I haven't read much Agatha Christie. I've only read The Halloween Party, which I didn't enjoy very much. It was written towards the end of her life in the 60s, and I kind of got the impression that she was not at her best at writing and plotting things out, and there was an element of hey you kids get off my lawn to it as well, which I didn't like very much. But this is a much earlier piece of her work. It's supposed to be a really, really good one. It's set, I believe, on a small island which all of our main cast are invited to and then start to get picked off one by one. That's as much as I know about it. I don't want to know any more than that going in because it's an Agatha Christie murder mystery. And my final book in the mysteries, thrillers and horror section is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. This, I believe, is quite similar in tone to Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I read last year and I absolutely loved. And it's a story of a young man who suspects that his cousin Rachel has murdered his uncle, I think, something like that. So he has the suspicions about her, and Rachel is a bit enigmatic. You don't know whether she is another victim in whatever's gone on or a manipulator of the situation. There's a bit of ambiguity around that, I believe. I love Daphne du Maurier's writing style after reading Rebecca, and I've wanted to read more of it for a while. So yeah, I'm adding My Cousin Rachel to the list. So now I'm on to my final section, which is science fiction and fantasy. And this is my final book in my top 10 of hardest books I need to read. And we've got Dune by Frank Herbert. So this is the story of Paul Atreides. It's set in a distant future where the most valuable resource in the entire universe is this substance known as the spice. And the spice is only found on one planet, the planet of Arrakis or Dune. Paul Atreides' family is sent in to Dune in order to manage the mining of the spice, and it's all of this inter-house intrigue between the Atreides family and the Harkonnen family, and all of these political wranglings and all sorts of weird psychedelic shenanigans that go on with it. People really love Dune, and I tried to read it many years ago, and it's fair to say I didn't really give it a fair crack of the whip, so I'm going to give it a proper go now. And I can't promise that I'm going to read all of its multitude of weird-ass sequels, but I'm going to do my best to get through this first one. Next up, we've got The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, which is a science fiction alternate history type story that is on the premise that what if the Nazis had won the Second World War and the US was invaded and occupied by that Nazi regime. Weirdly, on my long list, I had 3 alternate histories. What if the US had succumbed to fascism stories? The other 2 were It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis and The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. But I thought that 3 of the same thing on the list would be a bit much, so Philip K. Dick was the one who won the day. Actually, you could argue there was 4 on the list because my next one is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Except this one isn't about the US declining into fascism around about the time of the Second World War. This is on an alternate future where the population is decreasing due to reduced fertility, and what happens is America falls to a ultra right-wing regime, and the fertile women are kept as these subjugated handmaids and are essentially this underclass of slaves that are kept entirely for procreation. This, of course, has the very famous TV series, but I've never actually read the book, The Handmaid's Tale, so I have read some Margaret Atwood. I've read 2 out of the 3 books in the Mad Adam trilogy. 1 I loved, 1 I didn't like quite so much, so it'll be interesting to see where this one lies. Next up, I want to include some Isaac Asimov, and I hadn't read any Isaac Asimov, so it seemed like probably the best place to start was I, Robot, which I believe is the start of his robot series. It establishes his 3 laws of robotics and then has a number of short stories set in that world. It goes on to more robot stories, and then of course it goes into the Foundation series as well, which I believe they then start to cross over. People who've read Isaac Asimov love Isaac Asimov, and I haven't read any of it, so iRobot seems like a good place to start. Next up is a bit of an odd one because it is the novelization of a film, which is 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke, which is based on the screenplay of 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick, which I believe was based on a short story by Arthur C. Clarke called The Sentinel from about 1950, something like that. And 2001: A Space Odyssey was actually a film by Stanley Kubrick, as opposed to All Quiet on the Western Front, which I said in my last video was a Stanley Kubrick film, and I, of course, was thinking of Paths of Glory. Shout out to the commenter who spotted that one. But 2001: A Space Odyssey is an expansion of the story that Clarke had written many years earlier, and is the story of the mysterious alien monolith and its encounters with humanity, from humanity's earliest encounters at the jump-starting its evolution to the fictional future of 2001, which was in the future when this was originally written, when humanity has a mission beyond Jupiter to find the same alien monolith. And during that mission, the computer on that vessel malfunctions. The notorious evil HAL 9000. Fun fact, the reason they came up with the name HAL for the evil computer was they took the letters IBM and then just moved them one on the alphabet. Now, when I was putting together my list of criteria for selecting these books, I did say that other than James Joyce, because he'd come from my top 10 hardest book list, I wasn't going to include the same author more than once. But then I ran into a problem because I was looking at a particular author who had a seminal piece of work in science fiction and one in fantasy, and I went back and forth over which one to include, and in the end I thought, sod it, it's my list, I can do whatever the hell I want. And that's why we've got two books by Ursula K. Le Guin: The Left Hand of Darkness and A Wizard of Earthsea. So Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin is her science fiction work, and it's set on this planet called Gethin, where it is eternally winter, and they receive a diplomat from Earth trying to convince Gethin to join their sort of union of planets, this sort of planetary alliance that they have. Other than that, I don't actually know much about what happens in this story, other than the fact that this is considered to be one of the best pieces of science fiction from the 60s. And next up by Ursula K. Le Guin is A Wizard of Earthsea. This is actually the first 4 books in her Earthsea series, but I'll read the first one and see how I get on with it. And this is about a young wizard called Ged and his coming of age and learning magic and all of that sort of stuff. This, I think, is also the basis for Tales from Earthsea and the Studio Ghibli film. But Studio Ghibli are pretty loose with their adaptations. They'll take some vague ideas and then kind of do their own thing with them. So the fact that I've seen that, I don't think is necessarily going to spoil this book for me. Next is Hyperion by Dan Simmons, which I believe is basically the Canterbury Tales in space. So it's a science fiction story set on a journey to the planet of Hyperion that a number of pilgrims are taking, and their various different stories that they have. This is the first in a series about Hyperion. I haven't read any of Dan Simmons' work, but this comes very, very highly recommended. Next is The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. Again, a book that has come very, very highly recommended. This is set in a dystopian future, and I believe is the story of a young woman who is venturing across North America, having managed to escape a cataclysm or an attack on the sort of gated community that she was living in beforehand. Apparently this is excellent. I haven't read any of Octavia E. Butler's stuff, so we'll see what this is like. And the 50th book on my list is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Now, this is the story of a character called Piranesi who lives seemingly alone in this building that seems to go on with corridors and rooms to pretty much infinity. I have been told that if you like House of Leaves, which I do, then this is an excellent book to read. Now, I'd always intended to have one of Susanna Clarke's books on this list. The only question was going to be whether it was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell or Piranesi. And in the end, because of the huge size of the tomes that I've put on this list already, I took the coward's way out and I went for the book that was the shortest. So that's it. So to recap, the 50 books are Journey to the West by Wu Cheng-en, Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy, Call of the Wild by Jack London, Ulysses by James Joyce, A Passage to India by E.M. Forster, All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque, The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, At Swim Two Birds by Flann O'Brien, Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh, East of Eden by John Steinbeck, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, Gravity's Rainbow, Thomas Pynchon, If on a Winter's Night a Traveller by Italo Calvino, Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, Money by Martin Amis, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark, The Bell by Iris Murdoch, The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe, Team of Rivals by Doris Keane Goodwin, And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier, Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin, Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, The Bloody Chamber and Other Stories by Angela Carter, I, Robot by Isaac Asimov, The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, Dune by Frank Herbert, 2001 A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke, Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, Hyperion by Dan Simmons, Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, and Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. So that was my list. As I go through these over the next 2.5 or so years, I'll give updates and I'll give reviews for each of the books that I read. When I start to read any of these books, I'll put a post on the community page on my YouTube channel. So if you want to read along and want to know what I think, please keep an eye out for those. The one thing I didn't say before is that I don't generally DNF books, but there are a couple in here which there's a possibility I might end up DNFing. James Joyce, I'm looking in your direction. If I decide to not finish one of those books, I will substitute in another book from my long list to take its place. So I'm not anticipating that this list is going to change much, but it could possibly change a little bit over the next 2.5 years. That might be cheating a little bit, but it's my rules, my list, I can do what the hell I want. So what do you think of my choices? Please tell me in the comments down below. And if there's any of these that you've read, can you tell me what you thought of those so I know what I have in store for me? In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that, and take care.